I'll say this. Trouble in paradise. Yeah, something's a little bit off with the Detroit Lions. We are going to discuss all that after, another rough weekend. We've had some brutal ones. I know Michigan technically won, but we'll break all of that down. It's strange because I'm actually, the Lions actually lost their game, and I'm probably find myself less frustrated with the state of that team and that organization than I am with the state of Michigan football right now. We'll discuss all that, but before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, at CastleLane2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok as well, getting closer to 12,000 followers on there. Watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're available on Apple Podcasts in audio form. We're available in audio form on Spotify. All right, let's jump right into it. Mainly football stuff today. I don't know if I'm going to get to any Tiger discussions. A lot of it depends on time. I don't want to get redundant with the offseason, and the offseason is nothing if not redundant. You know, if Tarek Skubal gets traded, I'll do a segment about Tarek Skubal getting traded. But I don't want to do a segment on my show every week being like, maybe should they? Like, I've been pretty open about the fact that I think he will be traded. Well, we will see what happens, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But let's talk about some football. And, yeah, we got to start with the Detroit Lions, the game that I was at. Shout out to It's Too Easy, to Eric and Katie. They were awesome. I can't wait to watch that vlog, and you guys are, not that they need my plug, but please check out their YouTube page. Love seeing Detroit-based content creators going out and grinding and joining of forces. Would love to go to another game with them sometime. But on the downside, the Lions did lose 27-24 against the Minnesota Vikings. You know, sometimes having a bye week is not the best thing in the world because they played like a team that hadn't played in 2 weeks. They looked a little bit sluggish. And, you know, I said in my post-game video, you're going to lose games in this league. You know, there's only been one undefeated team, at least in the regular season, in the modern age, and that team didn't win the Super Bowl, right, in the 07 Patriots. And I think that with each loss, you have to take it for what it's worth, and I think with an organization like this that is in championship mode, that is in the midst of a wide-open championship window, you know, you ask yourself, is this just a bad day in the league, or are there legitimate reasons for concern? And unfortunately, with this being the third loss of the year, it's not so much that they lost, because divisional games are always a little bit tough. It's the fact that we've now seen several instances of the same problem emerging. And, you know, against Tampa Bay, they played a marvelous defensive game. So marvelous that we overlooked the fact that after that scripted first drive, the Lions offense looked very pedestrian. And look, I know that this is an organization and a coaching staff that prides themselves off of grit and toughness and representing the city, and I think that's wonderful. And there is toughness there. They're not a finesse, nothing team. Like, there is toughness, there is depth, there is leadership. I don't want to knock it. But with that said, over the last several years, the identity of this football team has been their offense. It's the weapons they have. It's the way they protect their quarterback, the way they can sustain drives, but they also have the ability to be tremendously explosive. And obviously, Ben Johnson set an amazing precedent. But of course, you look at the weapons that Ben Johnson was given by Brad Holmes, and they had a historically good offense last year and have over the last several seasons. And this year, despite the fact that, look, they're by no means out of it. The Packers lost. They're still in position to win the NFC North right now. It's fair to say that for the first time, probably since the early part of Dan Campbell's second season here, something seems a little bit off with the offense. And I think where it starts, and we saw it on Sunday, and I feel like we should have seen it coming because the Lions were going up against a DC and Brian Flores, who's famous for bringing pressure. He loves his blitz packages, and they knew what their strategy was. They were going to try to put pressure on Jared Goff, try to make him uncomfortable. Sacked 5 times, and boy, as somebody who was at that game, it felt like a lot more because you got 5 sacks. I would say there were probably about 10 other instances of him rushing a throw, throwing flat-footed, forcing a throw. I mean, he was not comfortable all day. And I like Jared Goff. We all like Jared Goff, but Jared Goff has one glaring weakness, which is the fact that the guy's a statue back there. He is not a mobile quarterback. He's not capable of extending plays. And that hasn't really mattered over the last few years because the offensive line play was so good. They kept the guy upright. And this offense existed in a way, especially under Ben Johnson, where the timing was so important. And it would be a 3-step drop and boom, there was St. Brown in the flat. 5-step drop going over the top to J-Mo. Or, Laporta had a big day yesterday and has had several big days since he got drafted out of Iowa. But the timing and the rhythm is very clearly off right now. And Jared Goff, as good as he's been, and I really do like the guy, I think he's been wonderful here. He earned his extension. He is not a quarterback capable of making something out of nothing. And they didn't do a good job of protecting him. He wasn't really able to extend many plays. He was rushing throws, and the offense was off their game all day. And this is now 2 days in a row and 3 games in total. You go back to game 1 against Green Bay where the offensive line is starting to become an issue. And that is something that Brad Holmes, the second he got here, talked about developing through the trenches, and they've done a wonderful job with that. But, hey, you look at the Ragnow injury, you look at some of the injuries that have added up on the offensive line, obviously Mahogany getting carted off yesterday in the second half of this game. All of a sudden, that unit looks pretty thin, and that affects everything. It affects the passing game. It affects the running game. You weren't able to get Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery going at all yesterday. In the second half, Gibbs was barely out there because they knew that they had to protect their quarterback. It probably felt better having Monty out there in pass protection because you were playing from behind. You just couldn't really get anything going. And I think over the last several seasons, the only way to beat the Lions offense is if the Lions offense beat itself. You saw in the playoffs last year, they moved the ball effectively. They just turned the ball over. There were a few dumb play calls in the red zone, but as a whole, they scored like 31 points, I think, in that game. This year, it's a bit different. This year, the book is now out. If you apply pressure, if you make Jared Goff uncomfortable, there's not a whole lot that he can do to get this offense humming. Now, look, it wasn't a awful performance. They weren't shut out. They scored 24 points, but you had an opening drive, a scripted drive where you drove right down the field, and then you hit the big play to J-Mo there at the end. Incredible play by Jameson Williams, and if there is any positive to take away from this game, it's that they started to get J-Mo going again. John Morton talked about it during the week that he feels like he's failed Jameson Williams, and they were trying to get him more involved, and they did, especially in the second half of that game. But, when you have an offensive line that's a little bit depleted, and when you have a quarterback that is not particularly mobile, I feel like you got to be crisp with your play calling, and you got to make sure that he's getting the ball out quickly. And they kept trying to run these stupid screens, and it just wasn't working. It was not a great day for John Morton, and it was a great day for Brian Flores. And I think outside of the offensive line just getting bullied, that was kind of the storyline, is the fact that you felt like Minnesota's defensive coordinator just completely body-bagged Detroit's offensive coordinator. I think as a whole, the defense played pretty admirably. They were given some short fields. They forced a turnover. Terrion Arnold with his first career interception. Throughout the game, I felt like they made enough plays, and they kept handing it back to the offense, hoping that they could sustain a drive, and very rarely were they ever able to do so. And look, there's going to be adjustments. I trust this coaching staff. At the same time, this was the first time since week 1 where I felt like I was watching the team I expected to see this year, which is not a bad team. It's a playoff caliber team with a lot of weapons, but one that has taken a step back from the last 2 seasons. And we'll see how they respond. Look, the one thing that you got to give Dan Campbell a ton of credit for, they don't lose back-to-back games. They do not lose back-to-back weeks. And you got a bit of a revenge game going to Washington next against a banged-up Commanders team. That's a huge bounce-back opportunity. They're still in good standing, but this was a rough game. It was a rough game in which I felt like you were out-schemed. I felt like you were out-coached. And, if you're the Vikings, look, I think they're better than their record. They had JJ back. He played much better than he had over his first several games as a starter. They still have some weapons, but tough loss and surprising because this offense has been as consistent a unit as there's been in the entire sport over the last few years, and they made everybody look human. And all of a sudden, you make God bleed a little bit. You get a little nervous. I still have faith and trust in the powers within the organization that they can get this right, but it was a flat performance at home coming off of a bye week, and because of the layoff, it was quite surprising how lethargic they looked at points. And though this will be the last point, they got to get healthy, man. I talk about this all the time, whether it's Tigers, Lions, what have you. If I have a team that has a ton of injuries, I don't know enough about medical science or the human body to say that it's the strength and conditioning coach's fault. Like, I'm the furthest thing from qualified to talk about that stuff. At the same time, the number of injuries over the last few years is staggering, like historic, and it continues. Last year was the defense. This year it's the offensive line. You know, you saw a Meek come out of the game. You saw St. Brown come out of the game. You saw Branch come out of the game. Now, I think all three of those guys came back in. And, of course, Mahogany getting carted off. So that's going to continue to add up. Like, if there was ever a game where you wish there was a bye week, it was probably after this game. And yet the Lions will continue to march on forward. So disappointing effort, disappointing ball game. Speaking of disappointing, wonderful segue on my part. You're very welcome. I want to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. I have to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. Want to is a subjective term right here. Michigan beat Purdue on Saturday at night in the Big House, 21-16. Purdue, I think, is 2-7 on the season right now. Michigan came in as a 3+ touchdown favorite, and I've talked about it for several weeks. This is the soft part of their schedule. I know you could include Michigan State in that, obviously, but Michigan State is a rivalry game, and that particular game and this version of the rivalry was kind of a potential to save Jonathan Smith's job, and so you knew that there was going to be something you had to bring to that game, but you had three basically tune-up games coming up. Maryland's not any good. I know they have to go to Maryland, but Mike Locksley will screw that up. And so I'm saying to myself, I really want to see them go out and execute against a bad team. One of the few games that I came away from this year actually feeling good about was the Central Michigan game. And we can look at it now and say, oh, come on, it's CMU, it was 63-3. Yes, but they didn't have many games like that last year where they just went out and executed and they played some bully ball and you got your quarterback going. That's what I wanted to see on Saturday against Purdue. And I can't be more blunt than what I'm about to say. I think that is as close to a loss as any win has felt since the Hoke era. And we had a lot of games like that in the Hoke era, whether it was Air Force or Akron or UConn on the road where, you'd win and you'd improve your record and you'd be hovering around the top 20, but you knew the second this team plays a legitimate opponent, they're going to get popped. In fact, I want to say like 2013, I think Michigan and Michigan State came into that game with the same record, and that was the minus 48 rush yards game. It's like anytime this team plays an opponent with a pulse, they get completely exposed. And, this is a team sport. And I bring up all the time complementary football, and that's so impactful. You want to keep your defense fresh. You want to keep your offense fresh. People talk about it 2 years ago with the group that Michigan had that won the national championship. That was just beautiful. That was like perfectly oiled machinery. The way that every cog fit into the system. Every cog moved in the machine, and you never felt like the defense was gassed. You never felt like the offense was gassed. And they haven't been able to play a lot of complementary football over the last few years. With that said, I bring that up because it's a team game. Okay? I understand we put the laser focus on quarterbacks, and I get it. That's the role. They're the top dogs in the team. That's totally fine. But I've seen games where quarterbacks played brilliantly and the team lost. I've seen games, Ohio State last year, where quarterback play was non-existent and Michigan still found a way to win. I don't like to put it all on one guy, whether it's praise or negativity. With that said, we got to have something of a discussion here about Bryce Underwood. And I already saw on TikTok and I already saw on social media, people are starting to get their torches and pitchforks out with my criticisms, okay? The guy is an 18-year-old true freshman. I do believe that he's going to improve. I do believe he's going to get better. Gun to my head, considering how small of a percentage he is into his career, I think he'll probably end up being quite good. This season, up to this point, 9 games in for Bryce Underwood, and we have a quarter left of the regular season to change this opinion, has not been a very inspiring freshman season. Okay, I see the talent. Of course the talent's there. What would you expect? The guy was the number 1 player in the country coming out of high school. Okay, he's not going to be Nathan Peterman in the NFL. The guy's going to have a big body. He's going to be able to move. He's going to have a rocket of an arm. I understand that, okay? And we've seen that. But I thought he played as bad a game as you're going to see a Michigan quarterback play, and it's even more frustrating because last year, the guys they had were just dogs. Davis Warren and Orgy and Tuttle, these guys just didn't have it. I mean, these guys probably couldn't have played in the MAC, and you have a guy in Bryce who you clearly see the intangibles are there, and you clearly see that the gifts are there. But this is something I've talked about forever. For the most part, and there are exceptions, the talent has been there with every Michigan quarterback that I've ever watched, okay? To quote Brady Hoke, this is Michigan, for God's sakes, okay? They're going to bring in 4 or 5-star talent, okay? I mean, let's run down the list here in a post-Chad Henne universe. Tate Forcier, I think, was a 4-star. Denard was a 4-star. Devin Gardner, I think, was a 5-star. Shane Morris was a 5-star. I think ended up dropping to a 4-star. Wilton Spate was 4-star. Shea Patterson was one of the top-rated high school quarterbacks in the country when he originally committed to Ole Miss. You've had all these quarterbacks in the last 2 decades, and there's one that was legit, and it was J.J. McCarthy. Okay, I'm not going to go on my Michigan doesn't do a good job of developing quarterbacks rant yet, but whether you want to blame Bryce or whether you want to blame the system around him, he is not progressing as a freshman the way that we want him to. I think we've been very understandable and very patient, okay? This guy was coming in, and I know the contract. I know all the outside circumstances. You have to expect struggles, okay? You have to expect that there's going to be some growing pains, some kind of learning curve. Where I get concerned is the fact that I think the best version of Bryce Underwood that we saw this season, sans maybe the Washington game, was in the first few weeks of the season. I thought against New Mexico and against Central was when I watched him and said, wow, this guy really seems like he's improving. Against Purdue, I wish that there was a wins above replacement for football players because this guy would be like -3. He did everything possible to try to cough up that game for Michigan. 2 turnovers in the red zone, forced throws, overthrows. I mean, he missed about 2 or 3 touchdowns. And this is not a great receiving corps. And even their best receiver is probably Andrew Marsh, who's a freshman. I get that. But this was not an instance of drops, okay? And there were a few tough plays, a few plays that could have been made. You got to cool it with the fastballs. There's no touch on his passes, and it's the biggest frustration I have, not just with Bryce Underwood right now. It's the biggest frustration that I have with quarterbacks in the modern age, which is I want quarterbacks, okay? I don't want athletes at quarterback. That doesn't mean I don't want my quarterbacks to be athletic. It means what matters more to me is reading a defense, running an offense, and understanding the situation that you're in. People still, despite 7 rings, will criticize Tom Brady for his dink and dunk approach, for his 6 to 10 yard pass plays where he wasn't really hitting anything over the top. People who criticize that kind of quarterbacking, you don't know the sport of football. Because the goal is to advance the fucking ball, okay? And every so often you might hit with a 60-yard bomb. But in general, what matters is how you view things pre-snap, what defense you see the other team in, how you audible, what you do before the ball's even snapped, how quickly you get the ball out. That's how you play quarterback, okay? Whether it's in fucking Pee Wee League or in college or in the NFL. It's not, I'm going to take a snap, immediately get out of the pocket, and then throw a 300-mile-per-hour fastball over a guy's head. And I get concerned about the present, but I understand where he's at. I get more concerned about the future, and that's what scares me. I don't think that this is a very good coaching staff. If you want to put it on Sharon, if you want to put it on Chip Lidsey, go ahead. But the offensive play calling has been suspect at best all year. You are not explosive outside of your running backs, and one of them you already killed in Justice Haynes, right? Who knows when he's going to be back. Jordan Marshall had to will this team, a wonderful performance, will this team to victory on Saturday against Purdue. Purdue! There's fucking people in West Lafayette that forgot Purdue still has a football program, and you almost lost. For a large majority of that game, you got outplayed. And when I do my post-game videos, I understand that it's instantaneous. It's very reactionary, and I like to believe that's one of the appeals of the content that I create. But sometimes I'll wake up on Sunday morning and I'll say, okay, maybe I came in a little bit hot. I actually woke up on Sunday morning angrier than I was on Saturday night. Just because I don't think that I saw a prepared Michigan football team. I didn't see a prepared quarterback. Defense was fine. They have an advantage at every position, athletically. I just, right now, what I'm watching with this version of Bryce Underwood looking the way he has over the last 2 weeks is simply last year's team, but just with an easier schedule. One thing you do have to say about last year is that, like, Indiana turned out to be way better than we thought. You had to go on the road. Illinois turned out to be way better than we thought. You had to go on the road. Washington, you spit it up because you didn't know who you wanted to play at quarterback again. But this year, this is the worst 7-2 team in the country. It has to be. And I think I see where this is headed. They'll probably play a little bit better and survive their next 2 games and be 9-2 going up against Ohio State. I understand the way the last 4 years have gone. And I know last year was an upset that turned the entire college football world on its head. I do not see a future in which Michigan keeps that game within 2 scores. And part of it is Ohio State is rocking. True freshman quarterback, no learning curve there. Julian Sand might win the freaking Heisman right off the bat, right? They have the best receiving core in the country. Again, they're explosive again. Their defense is as good as it's been. A lot of it has to do with Ohio State, but the other side of it is I genuinely don't think this Michigan team is that good. And I know, look, man, you count your blessings, 7-2. There's programs that would kill to have 7 wins. I understand that. There's a lot of talent here, and I think there's a lot of wasted talent. And in a lot of ways, let's call it for what it is, how we felt about this season and how we felt about this coaching tenure was entirely dependent on how we felt about Bryce Underwood by the end of this season. And if the season were to end right now, and obviously it does not, but if it did, I'm not feeling great about Bryce. Bryce is I don't even know if he's going to be a 2,000-yard passer. He's taking every snap. And I don't want to make a change, okay? I don't know how good Bryce is at this point. Not only do I think he's the best quarterback on this roster, when you compare him to the guys that are behind him, he's probably the only quarterback on this roster. Okay, it's got to be baptism by fire. But I know it doesn't seem like confidence is an issue with this kid, and I get it, but I think he's got to mature. I think he's got to grow up a little bit, both in terms of the way he sees the game and the way that he's kind of handling himself. Bryce Underwood earned the money that Michigan gave him, okay, because he was an elite, top-tier high school talent. I'm not going to say that he should give the money back. That's a contract that he signed that he earned, right? But one of the big mistakes that 5-star or top-tier high school talents make when they arrive on campus is they assume that they've earned anything at the college level. Okay? Bryce Underwood got the money he got because of how he performed in high school. He hasn't done a fucking thing in Ann Arbor. Okay? That doesn't mean he can't still. Right? We got a lot of football left in his career. Right? But there's some guys who arrive on campus, and I'm going to use JJ here as an example. JJ set the bar, right? Who arrive on campus laser focused. They're focused on winning. They have a good head on their shoulders, and they are content. And JJ had to sit behind Cade McNamara. JJ was probably a better talent and quarterback than Cade McNamara in 2021, but they knew Cade was more likely to stabilize the offense. And he didn't pout, he didn't complain, and the rest is history, right? Lost 1 game here as a starter, 0 in the regular season. I think that there's a lot of growing on the field and off the field that Bryce Underwood needs to do. I'm not saying he's a bad guy or that he's a fool or that he shouldn't be the quarterback, but I watched what I watched on Saturday. It was pitiful. I mean, the airmailing on wide open throws. Marlon Klein's wide open in the end zone. He throws it off the guy's back. A maddening performance. And I hate to be focusing so much on the negatives, but the way that they played, if they played any other team in the Big Ten, they probably lose that game. It was so uninspired and gave me some serious Hoke-era flashbacks. And I had dinner with a friend on Friday, and I made this point, and I'll continue to make this point. Everyone's going to be on their best behavior till that game against Ohio State. How that game goes, and I brought it up a minute ago, I have a pretty good idea of how it's going to go. It's going to change everything. All of a sudden, the honeymoon period's going to be over, and people are going to bring out their hot takes, which aren't going to be so hot. This hasn't been a well-coached football team for 2 years, and they've been able to get away with it because they beat Ohio State and Bama at the end of last year. I think that they are headed for a extremely rude awakening in several weeks against Ohio State. I hope we see improvement. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Michigan State because as bad as they've been this year, they actually did something mildly interesting on Saturday, which, what a compliment. First, they lost to Minnesota in a game that was horribly officiated towards the end. Actually turned out to be a pretty good game, but I think the storyline of the game, regardless of whether or not they won or not, was the fact that Jonathan Smith, in a desperate but I think very easily explainable move, did not start Aiden Childs. Alessio Milivojevic, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I heard it enough on the broadcast, got the start for Michigan State. And here's the one takeaway that I'll have from that game. Thought he looked pretty good. And I thought he played better than Childs. And I think Childs has fallen into the issue that I just brought up with Bryce of good athlete, not a great quarterback. And I do think something got lost in the translation because I've seen moments from Aiden Childs that make you believe that there's a high ceiling there, and I think that there is, but there's also a significantly lower floor. And this Milivojevic kid, he came in, made some throws, sustained some drives. He'll be their starting quarterback the rest of the year. Now, I don't know what's going to happen after that. If Smith gets fired, he could enter the portal. Childs will enter the portal. Smith will enter the portal. The AD will enter the portal. I don't know what's going to happen. But the one thing that I've been saying for a few weeks, and it's, if you're a Michigan State fan, who the hell cares? I understand you're not even going to a bowl game this year. Like, what's the point? At the same time, the one thing that I will say is I still don't get the impression that the locker room has been lost. I haven't gotten the impression that guys have given up. This is a wildly undisciplined team, and they're poorly coached, and they beat themselves, which I think is probably like the number one sign of a poorly coached team, is that they seem to back into losses somehow, and we saw it again against Minnesota. You know, I mean, how many dumb penalties have they had this season? That Minnesota like had an entire drive in the fourth quarter that was just penalties, right? Michigan State kicks the ball out of bounds. You have, it's just one miscue after another, and you find yourself losing again. But you got some kind of spark, and for all the people that are saying that they feel like Jonathan Smith is checked out, I think his personality just bothers people, and I think it's the lack of energy that he brings is permanently going to annoy this fan base. I don't think he's quit on the program. I don't think he's quit on his players. I've been saying for weeks, months even, I just think it's a bad fit, and it's kind of a sign of how bad things are that you make a change at quarterback, actually get something of a spark against a Minnesota team that's not that good. And I like PJ Fleck a lot, but this is not one of his stronger groups. And you still find a way to lose. Just a brutal year for Sparty, and just not a great year for football in this state, to be honest. And maybe this is where I could kind of transition. Look, we got college basketball starting up on Monday. Michigan and Michigan State right around the corner here. 2 top 25 teams. Michigan a top 10 team. And, basketball, even more than college football, I think is so unpredictable because I've seen teams that were highly ranked that then ended up, not doing much. I've seen teams that were unranked that got crazy hot. I want to watch both these teams closely in the early part of the season, get a feel for what they are, but it is undeniable that expectations for Dusty May's program are astronomically high. And look, they were astronomically high for Juwan as well. I mean, people forget they were number 5 in the country preseason coming into that 2022 season. I mean, people really believed in him. They really believed in him. Yeah, a lot can change. Now, I feel better about Dusty than I did about Juwan. But you get my point. We're going to watch Michigan opens against Oakland, the Golden Grizzlies. Greg Campy's still there. A game that 4 or 5 years ago, Michigan almost lost in the COVID year. So they're going to have to bring it. There are no easy wins in college basketball, and I think that's what makes this sport very fun. But I'm incredibly excited that at the least we're in a very stable era of Michigan basketball. And look, Michigan State speaks for itself. They're going to be fine. And, there's variance. Maybe they'll be really good. Maybe they'll just be okay. But their worst teams have made the tournament. And Michigan State fans are, in that way, spoiled in the sense that they don't have to worry about sitting on the bubble come Selection Sunday. They are always in. All right. That'll do it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. At Castellani2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok as well. YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, available in audio form on Spotify, and of course, CastellaniContent.com being updated pretty much every single day with the content that Austin and I create. And of course, shout out to my friend, my dear boy, Austin Sisler, who continues to do a remarkable job. We're in November, and that means we're trudging along. We want to finish this year strong, and then we'll do some evaluation, but we want to hit the finish line. And we're going to do the best we can to get guests and put out good content, and I'm going to continue to talk with Austin and collaborate, hopefully with more people like It's Too Easy. I really like that. I want the communal experience is very important, and I think that's something I did not take advantage of in the past, is how wide of a reach Detroit fans have around here. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. We'll be back later this week with a Chris and Company, most likely, still trying to lock down a guest. I'll talk to y'all real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.